Welcome back, Vancouver, to the Institute of Urban Ecology. On today's episode about the Coastal Temperate Rainforest, I'm hiding inside one of the Douglas College Biology Lab greenhouses because our rainforest has sure been living up to its name these days. On today's episode, though, I want to talk about the angiosperms. Angiosperms are flowering plants, and they make up the largest, most diverse group of plants on Earth. They contain all of your grasses, shrubs, herbs, and most trees. Angiosperms, unlike conifers or ferns, reproduce using flowers and fruits. The seeds of the angiosperm are hidden within the female parts of the flower, which will eventually turn into a type of fruit. That's right, all flowers turn into a fruit. Now, some of that fruit we eat and some of it we don't, but those different types of fruit are why the angiosperms have become so successful at spreading across the land. So on today's episode, I want to talk about some of the most common angiosperms that you'll find in our coastal temperate rainforest. So let's get started. To understand how a flower becomes a fruit, I'm going to perform a little flower dissection, and you can follow along at home if you'd like. To follow along, you're going to need to grab your own simple flower. Now, a simple flower is a flower that grows singly on a stem and has radial symmetry. Lots of flowers grow in groups or bunches called inflorescence. And the inflorescence of a flower can sometimes even make it look like one flower, things like sunflowers and daisies, but these are actually large groups of really small flowers all together in one inflorescence. So to follow along, I recommend that you grab a flower like a lily or a rose or even a tulip. Flowers can be broken down into 4 parts. Working from the outside of the flower in towards the center, you have the sepals, the petals, the stamens, and the carpel, or sometimes called the pistil. The stamen are the male reproductive parts of the flower, and the carpel makes up the female part. Most flowers are hermaphrodites, meaning they have both male and female reproductive structures. We call these complete flowers. However, some flowers only carry one sex structure, and so it is possible to have separate male and female flowers. The lily here is an example of a complete flower, and I'm going to use it as my dissection specimen today. The sepals are the outermost layer of the flower and are usually green. The sepals help protect the flower while it is growing, and you can think of them as kind of the exterior of the flower bud. And then they help to support the petals when the flower is in full bloom. Some sepals have evolved to resemble petals after the flower bud opens to help attract more pollinators. The lily, for example, has 3 sepals on the outermost layer and those 3 petals on the inner layer. In full bloom, the sepals look exactly like the petals, but at an earlier stage in the flower's development, you can see that the sepals were green once, but as the flower blossomed and bloomed, those sepals transformed into these whiter versions that blend right in with the petals. I'm going to start my flower dissection by pulling away some of those sepals and petals so that we can get a better look at the stamen and carpels of the flower. So these are the stamen here. The stamen is made out of 2 parts. You have the long skinny filament, and at the top you have the anther, which is where the male pollen is produced. You can see it coming off on my finger here already. Now I'm going to pull away some of the stamen so we can get a better look at the carpel in the middle here. So this middle structure here is the carpel, and it has three parts. At the top, you have the stigma. This long middle portion here is called the style, and down here at the base, this kind of thicker green portion here, which I'm getting pollen all over now, that is the ovary. And inside the ovary is where the female reproductive ovule cells are kept. And after fertilization, those ovules are going to turn into the seeds of the flower. The ovary and some of the other parts of the flower are going to make up the fruit. Now, if I peel away very gently some of the layers of this ovary, we might get to see some ovules hiding inside. However, I don't think that these ovules have had a chance to be fertilized yet, so they're going to be quite small. It looks like we have some ovules right along here. So after fertilized, these will turn into, there they are, the seeds inside the fruit of this flower. Very cool. So go ahead and grab a flower from your garden and not your neighbor's garden. They tend not to like that too much. And see if you can identify the four parts on your flower. Now let's quickly just compare that lily to this rose here. Now you can see the pink petals here, 5 pink petals. You can also easily see the green sepals on the rose. In this case, they've remained green and don't resemble the petals. Below the sepals and the petals, you can also see very easily the ovary of the rose. In this case, the ovary is beneath the sepals and petals instead of above like the lily was. And now if I just fold these beautiful petals out of the way, you can see all those yellow bits. What do you think they are? The anthers. That's right. Anthers covered in yellow pollen. And right in the middle in there is your stigma. And so for this rose, if we pull away these beautiful pink petals, the style on the carpel of the rose is not as long as the style was on the lily, and that's okay. The flowers come in different shapes and sizes, but they all generally have the same parts. And now I'm going to push that aside for a second, and I just want to show you this here. This is the same rose, but this one has already been pollinated and fertilized. You can see, oh, there we go. There's the last of the petals there falling off. The sepals have still remained, and they're almost getting longer and greener here. But if we spread those sepals, and you see all those little dried up anthers down there now. And because, oh, and here's the ovary. You can see the ovary, again, it has been fertilized, and so it's starting to expand and grow into that fruit. Here's a little side by side here to compare. And I'm just going to take my blade here and cut this open and see, we might be able to get a better view of those seeds. Now, oh yes, and there they are. Again, the seeds that formed from the ovules after they were fertilized. You can see them all inside this rose fruit. Sometimes they call them rose hips. Oh, there we are. And there you are. To fertilize the ovules, the male reproductive cells in the pollen need to be transferred to the stigma of the flower. That is what we call pollination. And now some flowers can wind pollinate, but others need the help of other animals like bees or butterflies or bats to help spread their pollen. Without going into too much more detail, after the flower is pollinated, the ovules will become fertilized And the ovary and other parts of the flower sometimes will become the fruit. The fruit helps protect the seeds inside from desiccation and also helps spread the seeds around. Similar to pollination, some seeds can be wind dispersed and some can be water dispersed, and some use the help of animals who will ingest the fruits and then poop out the seeds later on. Mature fruits can be either fleshy or dry. Fleshy fruits include the familiar fruits such as apples and peaches and berries and tomatoes. Things like wheat, rice, and nuts are some examples of dry fruits. Now, although conifers are the dominant tree species in our coastal temperate rainforest, there are still lots of angiosperms to be found too. Salal is one of the most common angiosperms here. Salal flowers are small, pinkish white and bell-shaped. After pollination, they ripen into round, dark purple fruits. Salal berries were eaten fresh, dry, and used to sweeten other foods prepared by Aboriginal communities. Salal berries are juicy and sweet, but you should never eat wild berries unless you're an expert and can clearly identify what they are and that they are safe to eat. Salal does well in a cool, wet climate because of its thick, waxy leaves that remain green all year long. Salmonberry is another very common angiosperm of the coastal temperate rainforest. Unlike salal, its leaves are deciduous, meaning they'll fall off in the winter and the plant enters a dormant or hibernation phase. Salmonberry, thimbleberry, and blackberry are all closely related to raspberries. Salmonberry flowers look like pink 5-point stars and then ripen into yellow, orange, or reddish raspberry-type fruits. Thimbleberry can easily be distinguished from the other raspberries by its fuzzy maple-shaped leaves. Thimbleberry bushes also do not have any prickles or thorns. Its flowers are white and ripen into red berries that look like fuzzy, flattened raspberries. Himalayan blackberry grows in dense thickets with long, thick stems covered in prickles. The flowers are mostly white, sometimes with a slight pinkish tinge, and ripen into dark black raspberry-type fruits. Himalayan blackberry is not a native plant. It was introduced to North America as a farmed crop, but quickly escaped into our wild ecosystems and is now considered an invasive species. We're going to talk more about invasive species in another episode, so stay tuned. The trailing blackberry is the only native blackberry in the coastal temperate rainforest, but it's being outcompeted by the invasive Himalayan. The trailing blackberry is a smaller, less aggressive species. As its name suggests, its thin, delicate stems grow long and low, trailing across the ground. They're also kind of covered in a white wax, giving the branches a bluish-gray tinge. The flowers are white or pink with longer, thinner petals than the invasive Himalayan. The trailing blackberry is dioecious, meaning male and female flowers are produced on separate plants. This makes it more difficult for the female flowers to be fertilized and ripen into fruit, another reason why the Himalayan blackberry is taking over. Blackberries can often be confused with black raspberries, but you can tell the difference by looking at how the fruit comes off the plant. Raspberries are hollow inside, whereas blackberries have a solid core. Red huckleberry is probably the third most common angiosperm in the coastal temperate rainforest, just behind salal and salmonberry. It is a tree-like shrub growing up to 4 meters tall with angled bright green branches. Most of the huckleberry leaves are deciduous, but some can remain green all year long. Its flowers are greenish yellow or pink and grow singly, usually dangling below the branches and the leaves. The berries are bright red, round, and a little sour to taste. Aboriginals ate the berries fresh, dried, and mashed into cakes, and the berry juice was used as a mouthwash. Oregon grape is a tall evergreen plant with pairs of spiny leaves growing from the stems, and it can get up to 60 centimeters tall. The leaves turn purple and red in the winter, and it has bright yellow flowers that'll ripen into blue berries. Pacific rhododendron is a popular plant in most people's gardens because of their evergreen leaves and big, beautiful flowers. This is a great example of a flowering plant whose fruit we do not eat. You may not have even noticed the brown woody fruit capsules that appear after the big showy flowers have been pollinated. There are many different species of rhododendron that have been introduced into our urban gardens, but the Pacific rhododendron is the only native species. Its flowers are usually pink to rose purple, however some variations do exist. Kinnikinnick and Nootka rose are two other native angiosperms that make a great addition to your home garden. Kinnikinnick makes a great ground cover with its evergreen leaves and bright red berries. The flowers of the kinnikinnick are a little less noticeable, being small, pinkish white and drooping. The Nootka rose, however, has big, beautiful pink flowers and is great for our native pollinators. The purplish red fruits of the Nootka rose are often called rose hips, and they can be made into jellies or teas. The seeds are really hairy, however, and are generally removed beforehand. As an added bonus, the Nootka rose is mostly prickle-free. If you're interested in how to make your urban garden more eco-friendly, stay tuned. Coming up, we're going to have a special video all about landscaping with native plants like kinnikinnick and Nootka rose. Big leaf maple and vine maple are two very common deciduous angiosperms. Maple flowers turn into dry, winged fruit after they're pollinated. Another example of a fruit that we don't eat. Nuts are also dry fruits with seeds hidden inside. The walls of a nut fruit are just thick and hardened. The Garry Oak produces fruits called acorns. Garry Oaks are not very common trees in the coastal temperate rainforest, but can occasionally still be found in the coastal western hemlock biogeoclimatic zone. They prefer to grow in wide open meadows, and they do not compete well with dense conifer communities. The Garry Oak ecosystem also needs to compete with humans and invasive species for space. The areas where the Garry Oak used to thrive have mostly been replaced by urban development and agriculture. Only about 3% of that ecosystem remains. Most of that is on Vancouver Island, and it's now considered Canada's most endangered ecosystem. To find out how you can help, check out the Garry Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team's website. I'll include a link to it below in our video description. Although conifers dominate the coastal temperate rainforest, angiosperms have a very important role to play in this ecosystem too. Flowers and fruits are a critical food source for a lot of our local wildlife, including our native bee species. Your home garden is a really important part of our urban ecosystem as well. Check out some of our other videos to see how else you can help protect our rainforests and how you can turn your home garden into its own little urban ecosystem. Like our video on how to do biological control with Dr. McGregor, or how to go grass-free, or how to DIY your own bee house. Until next time, Vancouver, thanks for doing your part to help protect our urban ecosystems. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.